Let me start my video. My colleague on the ICOM board, Femke Huytema, will introduce you shortly, and then we are very eager to hear your story. So welcome everyone, and I'll give the word to my colleague, Femke.
Yes, hi Elise, hi everyone. My name is Femke Huytema. I'm director of the City Museum of Gouda, and I'm on the board with ICOM Netherlands, and we're really delighted that you're joining us today. Especially welcome to you, Elise, for sharing your story with us. You are head of exhibitions at the Design Museum in London, but you're also very much involved with making exhibitions more sustainable. And I, for one, know this is something that's really sort of bothering me and has been bothering me for the past couple of years. You know, we do nothing better and we love nothing more than to create a whole new world for each exhibition and to start again and make something amazing with wonderful experiences and lots of building and materials, and but it's somehow it doesn't feel like the right choice anymore. But it is what we do. We create experiences in exhibitions which we build up, and then after a couple of months we break it all down again. It's a very strange business we're in. So I'm really looking forward to your story and how you think about these issues and the toolkit you've been developing. So I think the idea is that you could just take us along in your story and your vision, and afterwards we can all ask questions. Yeah, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Thank you for this kind invitation. And sorry about the slightly false start. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this will all happen beautifully. Let's have a look. Okay, can I just get a thumbs up if you can see my screen? Excellent. All right. So I work here at the Design Museum in London. We are in a beautiful building in Holland Park in the southwest of the city. Thank you for the kind introduction, Femke. So I am head of exhibitions indeed. My team looks after the production and the delivery of all of our exhibitions and displays in London. And for the last 18 months, I've been the environmental impact lead. So I was very passionate about looking to see how we could reduce the impact of our exhibitions for a long time. And last year, the museum formalized that by giving me this new role. And I also have somebody in my team who is the environmental impact manager. And that's actually very important for us internally, kind of gives me permission to be a little bit annoying and ask sticky questions. Whereas before it was something that I led in my own team in exhibitions, but this has given me the invitation to help my colleagues on their journey as well, whether it's in events or estates or all the different departments that every museum has to run successfully. So today I'm going to run you through our journey. I'm going to start with a vocabulary check-in because having the language to talk about this is really important. When I started learning about the environmental impact of our work, about greenhouse gases, about all of this, I found the language very disempowering because I didn't understand it. And there are some basic terms that I think it's really helpful to be familiar with, to feel like you can be part of the conversation. We're going to talk a little bit about why it's important. So to Femke's point, we've been building these very beautiful, elaborate exhibitions and displays for many years. And then we all know, afterwards, maybe we try and reuse things, but they typically end up kind of skipped or in landfill, which is really quite shocking, actually, that we've been doing this for so long. And yet we haven't. It's time to change. I will talk to you about a catalyst for us, what we learned, how we did it, and where we're going. But first things first, to vocabulary. Now, if you know this, thank you for your patience. If you don't, I'll talk you through it. We talk a lot about scopes. So what is a scope? Typically, we divide our emissions into 3 scopes. So scope 1, this purple one here, is company facilities and vehicles. So typically things that you buy. Scope 2, purchased energy, purchased steam, heating and cooling. so energy that you would burn. And scope 3, everything else beyond. Scope 3 is all of those sticky supply chain questions, all of your third-party contractors. Typically, it's things that we have agency over. We might choose those contractors, we choose the materials, but we don't have a lot of control. Now, I don't know about the Netherlands, but certainly in the UK, we've actually been really good at measuring scope 1 and 2. And many Arts Council NPOs, that means we're funded by the Arts Council, have had to report on scopes 1 and 2 for quite a long time. But scope 3, very, very messy. But scope 3, if you're like me, that's actually where you live. That's your business. It's building things. It's those contractor relationships. It's all of the everything else. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So in case it's helpful, I'm going to give you a little shortcut. I remember it as scope 1 is what you burn. Scope 2 is what you buy around energy, and scope 3, everything else. Now, why is it important for museums to talk about this? Obviously, we are all working in museums. Museums are a force for good. We know that. We also know that our impact is probably absolutely tiny compared to some of the enormous corporations. However, we do use a lot of energy, and we also have a unique place in the public perception, public trust, to be able to communicate about these things with confidence and humility and bring the visitors that come to our sites on the journey with us and be a real catalyst for change. So in the UK, the museum sector accounts for almost a quarter of CO2 equivalent emissions of all Arts Council NPOs, more than theatre, dance, libraries, and other cultural institutions. So when I read that, I was really quite shocked. Now, we know that it's partly owing to our enormous collection stores as a sector. You know, we have quite strict temperature and humidity requirements. So a lot of the energy is used there. But we mustn't forget that when we build shows, when we tour shows, that has a huge impact too. Now, this is an audience survey by audience agency Indigo in 2023. They've recently released a new one, and the results will be published at the end of this month. But I share this because it's really interesting. I'd be curious to know in the Netherlands what similar statistics are, but I would guess that they're not too far off. Now, things that really stuck out to me when I was looking at this report: 91% of visitors surveyed expect organisations to ensure materials are used after an event or an exhibition. 91%. Now, I'm a little embarrassed to say that we don't always, or historically we haven't always reused things, not because we have loads of money and we like just building new things, but because we don't have money to store. We're in central London, we don't have space, or we don't have the resource to look after the assets that we keep. So it's actually cheaper to get rid of them and make new. And isn't that also in our modern life at the moment, our relationship to things? Often it is cheaper to just buy it again, but we really need to change that. Another stat that jumped out at me is this 77% of people who think cultural organisations have a responsibility to influence society about the climate emergency.
Okay.
So really quite surprising. And in fact, what this tells me is that our audiences who we serve, we have their permission to talk about this. This isn't a sticky topic, which is, well, it is very sticky, but it's not something that people think we should be avoiding or is political or something that isn't appropriate for cultural organisations. On the contrary, they're looking to us, trusted institutions, to talk to them about it and help them understand and encourage them to take calls to action. So back to the Design Museum, I'm going to whiz through a case study, which was the catalyst for us. There was really a before and after this show. In 2021, we launched a major exhibition called Wastage, What Can Design Do? This exhibition opened in London. It coincided with COP26, which that year was in Glasgow in Scotland, so not too far away. And it ran until February 2022. It was your typical, beautiful temporary exhibition in our main gallery space, about 850 square meters. It had a lovely timeline charting a very complicated relationship, actually, with waste, with plastic. It looked at design's quite also complicated relationship, how design has been complicit in a take, make, waste economy. we had this amazing installation by Ibrahim Mahama from Ghana, and it was exploring e-waste and how in the West we tend to, be quite proud. Oh, I recycled my batteries, or I recycled my TV, and we take it to a tip or wherever is appropriate to recycle. And then, we walk away, give ourselves a pat on the back, and we don't think about the cradle to grave life cycle of that at all. We've just passed the problem on to someone else. In the UK, we have charity shops, and it's a really similar thing. We take our old stuff to a charity shop, being pleased with ourselves that we've done the right thing, but we don't actually think that perhaps we shouldn't have bought it in the first place if it's going to end up being in landfill or someone else's problem to dispose of. We also had this, it's one of my favorite objects. I'm going to read it to you. It's from Life magazine. The objects flying through the air in this picture would take 40 hours to clean, except that no housewife need bother. They are all meant to be thrown away after use. So how far we've come since the 1950s, when plastic was this aspirational material which saved housewives time. So this show really showed how culture has changed, how our relationship to stuff has changed, and it also charted really new, exciting, innovative solutions that designers, architects, fashion designers are putting forward to help us out of this terrible, terrible mess that we have created. We had pioneers like Stella McCartney, who is obviously a leader in the eco-fashion industry for many, many years, and lots of other very inspiring objects. It wasn't all slightly sexist posters from the 50s. But how to do an exhibition on waste without understanding or without being able to really get our head around the fact that we were going to create waste, right? To make an exhibition, we were going to use energy to make plinths, even the stands that these beautiful garments are on. Someone made them. Carbon was emitted to produce them and bring them to our building. So it was really important for us, from a credibility point of view, to fully understand this aspect of the show and to introduce environmental responsibility into the brief with every single contractor, designer, partner, stakeholder. Now, I've been very interested in the environmental impact of museums and our activity for a really long time, over a decade. But historically, when I've talked to people about it, or designers, there was always a bit of a pushback, or people would nod and smile and say the right things, and then, to be honest, just ignore it and go about their business. But with this show, we put it front and center, and the content meant, really, quite frankly, no one wanted to look silly. So while before perhaps people had smiled and nodded and said, oh yes, we must do better, now people were really motivated to make sure that they were credible and had the integrity that you need when you're putting on a show of this type. So we had quite simple principles really around waste hierarchy, making sure, obviously, the first thing that you always have to think about is, do we actually need to do this? Prevention. Do we need so many plinths? Do we need so many frames? Doing less is typically the best place to start. But then if you have to do it, which often we do, and I'm not here to talk anyone out of a job, how can you make sure you build for reuse? And of course, recycling and recovery disposal, these are all actually not optimal. And again, recycling, I think sometimes we give ourselves too much credit for recycling. I think sometimes it can actually be a bit lazy. It means we haven't actually thought about it properly, and we haven't thought about how we're going to reuse it. And, it's all very well recycling, but if we keep making things, there's only so much recycling we can do. So these principles on the left here really were fed into the design brief and into every conversation, and they really shaped the project and our approach. So what did we do? We reused wherever possible. We had these silicate bricks that we had from a previous exhibition. We reused them. We put felt on the top to make a barrier between the object and the bricks. They were great. No mortar, no glue, no staples, so you can just reuse them forever, really, in whatever configuration you want. We, next one. We rethought the material palette. So we worked with some amazing designers called Material Cultures, who are actually specialists in low carbon build. And they did a lot of research, trying to move us away from these MDF walls that we all know and maybe don't love anymore. Those walls that we pop up, if we're lucky, we'll keep a couple for the next show, but typically they go up quick and then they come down. And if they are completely coated in some sort of fire-resistant material, you really can't do anything with them. They end up in the skip. So we didn't want that. We really gave our designers the time, and that's really important, to have that time to research a new way of looking at walls. Now, it's important to say that obviously there are certain materials that are appropriate for certain types of content. This show had a lot of items from contemporary culture. There were not hugely valuable, precious loans that had to have very strict requirements in terms of the materials they were around. So we had a little bit more freedom there than we would have in other shows with different content. But we made sure that we built for disassembly. So you can see our lovely bricks here again that you saw in the other photo. And on the right, this is an adobe brick wall. This was amazing. These are unfired bricks. Now, we worked out that if we had fired them, they would have used 6 tons more CO2e. So by not firing them, we saved all that CO2e. By having no mortar, again, no joins, no glue, they were able to be completely dismantled, and they were all biodegradable. Now, in the spirit of transparency, this was a circular wall, and at the end I did put a little bit of mortar at the end, just because I couldn't help myself. But the structural engineer said we didn't even need it because the integrity of the wall and the shape and all of his calculations were like, no, you're fine. But, I'm a project manager by training. I don't like risk. So we put that little bit, but that was only the tiniest bit right on the end. Everything else was freestanding. I mean, we've seen bricks before, haven't we, in skips where they're all stuck together with this mortar and you can't do anything with them. But this way we could. So we're really pleased with that. And these wood wall panels, so our alternative to MDF walls, could also be disassembled in different shapes and sizes. 2D. Now, it's not the most wasteful element of a show, but I really hate vinyl and I really hate Foamex. And I think they just look so horrible, as well as being really bad for the environment. So we really wanted to move away from those nasty Foamex panels that we've been using for a long time. So instead, we used a handheld print gun and we printed direct to media. So this is our wood wall walls that you saw, or directly on the walls here. It was really great. It looked gorgeous, really beautiful. It's a simple machine that you just, it does what it says on the tin, really. You hold it in your hand, it's handheld, and you print it directly on the wall. Now, I will say it's very good for straight lines. Curves, a little bit more challenging, but we did it and we were really happy with the result. And we saved a lot of that Foamex material and all that yucky plastic. Recycled captions. So we used recycled plastic. We had a lot of conversations around, do we need card or paper, or would recycled plastic be better? Initially, I actually thought paper would be better, but we used an impact model to understand how many times we're going to reuse these.
Sorry, Elise, just to interrupt. I think someone's probably got their sound on and making a phone call. So if you could all check whether your mic is apt, then we can all hear Elise. Thanks. Sorry, Elise.
No, I had a sip of coffee. It's perfect. So we used an impact model, a carbon calculator, to understand if this show were to tour and go on the road, would it be better to reproduce paper captions every time? Or is it better to use recycled plastic that we could then clean and reprint? And our model showed us that, surprisingly to me, the plastic was better actually. We had a low waste catalogue, no shrink wrap, vegetable-based inks, and just really thinking about the paper stock and the distribution model for that one. But back to this initial question of how could we do a show about waste and not understand the impact, not only from a waste perspective, but from a carbon perspective. My work recently has been very focused on waste, but also on carbon. I'm aware that those are just several factors of a very complicated landscape when it comes to the planetary emergency. Of course, there are things around biodiversity and many, many other aspects to this problem. But for us, this has been our focus because this is where we have the most impact in our work. So back to a life cycle assessment. What we did is we did a lot of research and we built this impact model, which is basically a fancy Excel. We worked with a consultancy and they developed this for us. And we now use a version of this for all of our exhibitions, actually. We use this in 2 ways. The first was to make decisions. So like I told you about those captions, is paper better or is plastic better? We put them in this model, this Excel, and it would tell us the quantity of CO2e, and we could use it to say, okay, this material will be better for this purpose than that material. We also used it at the end of the project to gather all the data, working with our contractors to get all the information to tell us what the CO2 impact was of the exhibition. And this is what we learned. It was 28 tons of CO2e. Now, at the time, 28 tons. What does that mean? I didn't really know. Now I do have a much better idea. In a similar way that I know what a £10,000 display looks like versus a £1 million exhibition, I'm learning what these different numbers mean, but it takes time. And every show, interestingly, that we now gather data for will have a slightly different diagram. So you can see some surprising things here for this wastage exhibition. Transport from abroad, 39%. This was one object. Now, the reason this is so high is because we had planned to send that object by sea freight. You know, we thought about it a lot. We'd used the carbon calculator, but at the last minute we had some production delays, so we had to ship fly some bits. Now, if I was being generous, I'd say, well, that's not our fault. The plan changed, but we've all been in this business for a long time. Life happens, things always happen. There are always delays, probably where you least expect them. So, you know, we sort of should have known better, really. And for me, I was quite worried about this, actually. And it was a key learning for me to really think about the objects. Transport from the UK, you know, we really tried to make sure most of the objects were sourced locally, as you can imagine. Smaller things, it was interesting to learn that file sharing and digital, negligible impact. Build, 31%. And this was using, you know, all these lovely materials that we'd researched. I don't know what it would have been like if we'd used our classic walls, probably much greater, and this number would have been much, much higher. So sharing our learnings, the wastage team were one project team in the museum. And it was like the Matrix, you know, do you take the blue pill or the red pill? We took the blue pill and nothing was the same again for us. We had a completely different lens of how to make decisions. We saw things in a different way. And it actually was quite profound in terms of a transformation in terms of our relationship to our jobs. However, we have lots of project teams in the museum, and it was quite funny to see them sort of going on as normal when we had had this amazing awakening. So I was very keen to make sure other project teams in the museum would know how the lessons we'd learned and feed that into their projects. And many colleagues in the sector were asking us too, not because we have all the answers, we don't, but we do know quite a lot. And some lessons we've really learned the hard way. So we decided to develop a toolkit to share with our colleagues internally in the UK and abroad. And if you've been on our website, and I can share the links, you might have seen it. We've developed an exhibition guide to designing for our time, to changing our relationship with how we build things. It includes all sorts of quite simple tips and tricks, really, around questions to ask your contractors at interview stage, things to put in your design brief, lots of considerations that we all know if we sit down and think about it, but we thought, you know, why not put it here, copy paste it in your briefs, in your tenders, whatever you need to do. That information, our learnings, is really there for people to use. And we've translated it into all 6 UN languages. Now, in this guide, you'll see some helpful tools. One of them was a direct result of that large bit of the graph, the 39%. I was quite worried and quite, you know, I suppose in some ways a bit disappointed that that was such a high percentage when we've been trying so hard to keep those exhibition miles down. But that's okay, you know, life is all about learning. We integrated that, and the solution, if you like, was to do this decision tree. So now we have a decision tree all around objects. And the idea is not at all to clip anyone's wings, not to stop people exhibiting beautiful key loans. It's to invite people to ask the question about, is it really worth it? Now, working in exhibitions with curators, project teams, we're really used to having that financial question, aren't we? Like, can we afford it? Can we afford it? well, what if we started thinking, should we bring it? Is it worth the carbon? Not just is it worth the money? And so this decision tree with 11 simple points just guides people through if you have some key loans that you're not sure about, or you know they're coming from far away, to ask, is it worth the carbon? It may be that you say, yes, it really is, because the message, the communication, the power of this artwork, this object is so, so valuable to the story I'm telling. Then it's not really my place to say don't do it. But it's really just to invite people to think about that, so that everything we can do, all those decisions, are made intentionally and with integrity, rather than afterwards being like, oh, what did we do? Because that's a really horrible moment to have at the end of the project. We also did a material decision tree. So forgive the size of this. I appreciate the writing's tiny, but I'll talk you through it so you get the gist. We get in a muddle sometimes around the materials we need to use, because we think, oh, if we do this in London, that's great, but what if the exhibition tours? Is it better for the environment to use a metal frame? Oh. Shall I carry on? Yes. Is it better to build metal frames, for example, for your walls, and they'll last 10 years, than not and last 4? And, you can get in a bit of a muddle around the usage of the materials and the things that you're making, the set works. So we've built this decision tree asking questions. Is your exhibition temporary or permanent? Will it tour? Yes, no, etc., etc. And at the end, you come to a materials list. So depending on how you ask the questions, you'll get a table of materials. And this breaks down materials, and this is really for your design teams. Green, you can use. Amber, let's check and have a chat. And red, really avoid. Now, you'll see there's quite a lot of crossover in this list, but it's really designed because it's not one size fits all. If it was really straightforward, we'd all be doing it well. It's complicated. So if you've got a show that will be on the road in trucks for 5 years, it's going around Europe, you want that design to be really rugged, robust, hard wearing, or you're going to spend much more carbon rebuilding it every show or every year. If it's something that's going to stay in place in your museum for 5 years, and it's a children's gallery, for example, again, you have a different set of criteria when you're building it. So thinking about that, this is what these different tables suggest to your designers. Now, obviously, there are some things in there that we know we have to use. We have to use virgin acrylic when we're looking after loans, for example. But what this does is invite you to think, well, could we use recycled acrylic? Or do we have a hood that we could clean and make sure was a very, very high standard? Could we propose that to the lender if we think it's appropriate? Obviously, conservation is key, and we don't want to lose the trust of any of our conservators by, being irresponsible. But it's all about having that conversation and not thinking we have to do something a certain way just because we always have. And these lists have really helped us reframe how we approach those conversations. And we've been doing it so well. We're really happy. We've been trialing it with different design teams. We do not have an in-house design team at the Design Museum. We always work with different designers, which is a privilege, because every time we work with a new studio, we share these rags, and every studio takes them in a different direction. Everyone has their own creativity and their own research. This is a show we opened last year, and the designers decided to basically use cardboard walls. We've got fabric partitions and these cardboard walls, which were fantastic. We also, and this was credit to the project team, we used recycled, refurbished mannequins. These mannequins were all saved from landfill, and we worked with conservation teams to make sure they were fit for purpose for these garments. Again, making sure that object care is always a priority, but also thinking outside the box. They're also a lot cheaper as well. And these are actually all ex-retail, which is really quite a wonderful story. They would have ended up in landfill. This was our Rebel exhibition, celebrating 30 years of London fashion. And we have our eco board panels, which are made from agricultural waste. This is also the Rebel exhibition, where we had fabric wrapped timber frames, again, just to reduce on that waste. Of course, often you need to put things on walls. So cardboard walls, fabric partitions might not always be appropriate, of course. We do need walls in exhibitions, as we all know. So what we've been doing this year is trialing a suite of movable, reusable walls. So we worked with a very talented designer and a build contractor to make some new walls, which will stay in the gallery, and we'll move them around every show. We started off with a small package, I think it's 5 small walls. And then in our autumn show, we'll build a few more. And over the next 2 years, we'll build up that suite of walls until all of the temporary walls in our main gallery can be moved around. And if we don't use them, they need to be stored in the space. We're quite clear on that, because as soon as we start taking them in and out, one, storage becomes a problem. One, rubbing up colleagues the wrong way because you've got massive walls in the loading bay becomes a problem. And 2, they get damaged and they become, instead of this beautiful, quite expensive, lovely wall, which is helping reduce our impact, they become these broken, damaged things that no designers or project team want to use. So we're really giving them a certain status and respect of these walls, and they have to stay in the gallery if they're not being used. We've also started talking to our audiences a bit more. Back to that audience report I showed you with the statistics at the start, we want to tell our audiences what we're doing, being really transparent, not pretending we've got all the answers, because of course we don't, but telling them what we're doing and bringing them on the journey, and also inviting them to help make us accountable too. So my top tips for you, as I'm sure you could see from those beautiful images, reuse, 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 always the priority. Borrowing, it's something we don't always have time to do, but circular economy hubs are fantastic. I'm actually looking at setting one up for Southwest London. Using tools like a carbon calculator and decision trees really helps you focus on the data. We have so many assumptions, so many ideas that really often are just wrong, that we don't even know where we got them from. Use the data, because the data builds confidence, and you can have those conversations with your project teams, with your designers, knowing that you've got the numbers and the facts and the figures to support what you're saying. Modular design, the less you use glue and screws, the more you can reuse. And it's a small thing, but getting your contractors on board, asking them to avoid using unnecessary packing materials. It drives me mad when our project teams have worked so hard to use low carbon materials, and then they come wrapped in reams and reams of plastic. It's very demoralizing. So it's really about that communication with your whole supply chain. But how? So how did a little museum or medium museum, there are only 100 of us, how did we go from not really even knowing what a ton of CO2 is, and it looks like that, by the way, how did we go from being a museum that had no idea about that to producing a baseline for all of our 2023 shows? So this was last year. We captured the CO2 data of every single exhibition and display to do trend analysis and really understand where are the areas we need to try harder, where are the areas that people might not realize have a big carbon impact. And this helps me develop a strategy with the team of areas of focus and make sure that I'm not taking us down rabbit holes. At one point, we read that having a video on a conference call takes more energy than not. Of course, makes sense. So we thought, oh, maybe we should all turn our videos off. But actually, when we looked at the data, the impact of having a video on is so tiny. I would argue right now, if you've got a lot of things to do, it should not be top of the list. So gathering data like this helps me understand where we need to focus our attention. And obviously, it's on shipping and it's on build. So how? Back to that question, how have we really transformed as an organization? I've been thinking about this a lot because I would love other people to be able to embrace this work. And my answer to that question is the rule of 25%. So I don't know if you know this rule, but there is an idea that 25% of people is a tipping point. There's when you reach a critical mass of 25% of people who are aligned around a common goal, the opportunities for change are tremendous. Now, 25% can actually be quite a small number. 25% of a whole museum is quite a lot.
Het kutweer.
Nou, vreselijk, hè?
Ik weet niet waar het kutweer is hier ook, maar wil je
de hele
microfoon
middag
uitzetten?
gaat het zo door.
Oh, echt waar?
Kunnen we dat doen? Milou, kan jij dat doen?
Ja, Ja, heel vervelend.
I'm sorry, Elise, just a sec.
That's all right.
Yeah, I think I muted the right microphone.
Okay, awesome. Dank, Milou.
It's lucky I don't understand Dutch. I'm on this talk, so boring, so glad you called.
No, it was about the weather.
Just complaining about the weather.
Where were we? 25%. So 25% of a museum might be a lot of people. 25% of a project team might be 1 or 2 people. 25% of a senior leadership team might be 3 or 4 people. So if today you're thinking, oh, actually, I am really interested in this, I want to do things differently, but I'm all by myself, don't be disheartened. Find other people and build your 25%, because the ripple effect will be absolutely extraordinary. I would argue that not only do we need to all be in this 25%, which, by the way, will quickly get to 70, 80, 90. I don't think there's anyone in the Design Museum who doesn't know about this work we're doing that's not really on board. Even our event.
Milou, dat is te enthousiast.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're back. Sorry.
Right. That's all right. I think
we're a bit messy. I do apologize. Please carry on, because it's very, very interesting.
It's totally fine. Where was I? A shift in thinking. What we need to do is be part of the 25%, and that's my invitation to you today, and really just think about things differently. Now, something I've been really pondering on this year is, how can the planet and future generations become stakeholders in what we're doing? You know, we're so used to having these big project meetings. We sit around the table with designers, with our directors, with our project boards, but I don't think that we're actually taking a moment to consider the planet and our children, our nieces, our nephews, the kids we see in the street. So I heard this lovely expression the other day: if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu. And right now, those people, those younger generations on the planet, they don't have a seat at the table. We're carrying on our work with complete disregard for them. We never think about them at all. And actually, that's quite shocking. So what I'd like to invite you to do, either mentally or actually, if you're feeling super brave, in your next project meeting, you could have an empty chair, which symbolizes these people. It's a little bit weird, but it's also really good. And it makes you remember that they should have a voice in these conversations. Yes, maybe they don't care, or the intricacies of yellow versus blue walls, but your decisions, the carbon impact of your work, is going to impact the planet and those future generations. So maybe that's just an idea you can start playing with your different colleagues and project teams. There's a wonderful book that was released at the end of last year by Nick Merriman, who used to be the director of the Horniman Museum, a gorgeous museum here in London, and is now the chief executive of English Heritage. And he says it's better to start the journey and be accused of being hypocritical, aren't we all afraid of that, and imperfect, again, project managers, we kind of like to have all the answers all the time, but it's better to do that rather than doing nothing and waiting to be perfect. So that is my wish for you. Don't worry about being perfect. We will make mistakes. I'm showing you our highlights. We've made lots of silly mistakes along the way. Every time we make those mistakes, we use them to improve, to learn, and it's an iterative process. You know, we're not climate specialists. We haven't done degrees in sustainability. We work in museums, but that's not to say we can't integrate a more holistic approach into how we do our work, by learning from each other. And there are more and more resources out there for us to help guide the way. So I've told you a lot about what we've done in the past at the Design Museum, but really it's just the beginning. We're doing lots more things that I just wanted to tell you about in case it's interesting for you, perhaps to replicate or find some of our resources to help you along the way. So we've set up an environmental consultancy arm. Currently, we're working with 20 museums around the UK to help provide a bit of more bespoke approach to how their institutions tackle the planetary emergency. We've set up a peer support network for all UK museums. So coming together to share best practice, to share learnings and to support each other. Because sometimes being that 25% is really lonely and we need that support and encouragement to continue. We're also working on resources that I will love to share with you once they're ready. So we're doing touring tools, much like those decision trees that you saw. We're going to do a touring version of those, which we're developing with a lovely organisation called TEG and the Art Fund. We're also making an environmental principles appendix. So this will be a template appendix that you can put in your contracts, which helps partners, whether they're touring or working together in another way, consider the environment. So back to that idea of, do you have a seat at the table? You know, we all work with contracts all the time. Has anyone ever had a clause about the environment in their contracts? Has anyone ever had a clause about who's going to report the data? What are our policies on reuse, on waste? It's quite shocking that we haven't done this yet, but that's okay. We just need to start doing it now. So that template will also be available probably around the autumn time, and it will be available for you to take, to update. We're not saying everybody should agree with what's in it, include everything, not at all. It's just to start having the conversation. We showed you our calculator, that fancy Excel. We're working with the Gallery Climate Coalition, and they're launching a new calculator, which will be much prettier than ours, better UX experience, and that will be ready in the autumn. So we've been advising them on the museum side. It will be free. We really encourage institutions to trial it, to use it, to feed back to the Gallery Climate Coalition, because I think if we're all using the same tool and it's free, we'll be able to do really good trend analysis. We'll be able to have conversations about the same things. You know, we're really building this new kind of wave of data collection around exhibitions and Scope 3. My slight worry is we all make our own tools and then none of them talk to each other and we can't communicate. So I think since we're starting from scratch, we should do it together in a forward direction. And then lastly, I wanted to touch on something in case, again, it's helpful for you, which is this group that we're part of called South Kensington. So this is the South Kensington neighbourhood in London. You might recognise some of these lovely museums. So we've got Natural History Museum, Science Museum, Victoria and Albert Museum, the Ismaili Centre, Royal Albert Hall, Royal College of Music. All of those institutions, along with the Design Museum, we're just sort of off here down the road, we've come together we've decided to work together to try and become an example of a low carbon neighbourhood. We realised with all of these amazing institutions, we have so much research, so much talent, so much creativity in one small neighbourhood that surely, if we put our heads together, we could really make an impact in terms of how the cultural sector is tackling the climate emergency. So we aim to show leadership through collective understanding, collective action, collective voice. Of course, you know, no one has enough money these days, budgets are tight, but together we spend a lot of money on contractors. Now, if we all had similar procurement policies, for example, around environmental requirements, then there's contractors. And I really believe they want to do better. They would have to do better. They would have to comply. So we're really working together as a unit and with these contractors too, of course, because they're so essential to the arts ecosystem to understand how can we have a really joined up approach in the sector in terms of how we're tackling the planetary emergency. So we're doing this quite specifically. We want to standardize our emissions reporting framework, again, so we can compare apples and apples and not have all these different numbers that don't really talk to each other. We're looking at a sustainable supply chain charter. We're looking at a knowledge network, so really using our beautiful, amazing platform to talk to the public and planning for a greener neighbourhood. So if you're ready to be in the 25%, if you're not already, I'm sure you are, what next? Make it a priority every day. Talk to your colleagues, talk to your people in your life at home, talk to your boss, talk to your junior colleagues. And if people have ideas, please encourage them. One of the biggest problems that I've seen and the biggest sort of complaints people say to me is that, oh, you know, I want to do it, but my boss is too busy, or my boss doesn't care, or it's just a different mindset from a different generation. We're really lucky at the Design Museum that we don't have that. And I think that's really one of the reasons why I have this immense privilege of being able to do this work. But if you are in a position of leadership, please make sure that you're open to a new way of doing things, because this current existing framework is not sustainable. So I can share all of these for you. This is the report I mentioned. We've also done a report for our Department of Culture, Media and Sport. We've got our tools online, the Gallery Climate Coalition, who are wonderful. They have a decarbonisation action plan, which is here. They also have something called active membership that you might have heard about. It's really worth looking into. And if you'd like to just learn more, because it's interesting, the BBC Rethink Climate podcast is amazing. It's actually from early 2023, but it's fantastic. There's a wonderful site called Take the Jump. Now that 25% statistic comes from that website. And if it's all a bit much, because it's a lot, it really is. And once you've taken that blue pill, you don't see things again, and it is a lot. There are lots of meditations and nice sort of helpful things online that can help you process it and create the space, remembering to kind of breathe and take perspective when tackling this really quite challenging part of our life in contemporary culture. So I'm not going to read this out because it makes me cry, but I'll leave that there on the screen. And if you have any questions, I'm all yours. Thank you so much.
Wow. Thank you, Elise. Yeah, so inspired to make a change, even in our small museum. You've shown us that there's so much we can do, and things I've never thought about and just assumed, or I don't know, never really questioned. So I think everyone's really inspired. All the comments are very positive. I think if you could maybe stop sharing your screen. Yeah, that's great. We can see each other. I was especially shocked by the fact that museums are so much worse really than other cultural sectors. And of course the climate is one of those factors, and it's great that we're all thinking about that as well. You know, if churches can house panel paintings for centuries, then maybe there's something in you know, maybe you don't have to use so much energy to sustain and to conserve. So that's a discussion we're all having, but there's so much more to do, and I'm really glad to be, yeah, well, to have so many tips. And it's so wonderful that you decided not to just do it and keep doing it, but also to share and to create this toolkit and to help us all really. So that's awesome, and I understand it's all available on your Design Museum website. So yeah.
I mean, in terms of the sharing, we, you know, as a sector, well, across the whole world, we need to urgently reduce our emissions by 50% by 2030. Now, what I find quite wild is that some of us probably know what exhibitions are going to be in our forward program for 2030, but we don't have the first idea about how we're going to reduce emissions. So we don't have time, which is why we're giving all this away, because it's not about keeping it for ourselves. We need to act, and we need to act really, really fast.
Yeah.
There was also a question in the chat by Charlie. She says, is your current calculator already accessible now?
Yes, it's online. You're so welcome to have a play with it. There are a few challenges with it in that it's locked to the Design Museum. So when you're calculating shipping, for example, it's shipping to the Design Museum, which obviously is different if you're based elsewhere. But yeah, it's a really good tool to have a look. And actually that back end, that Excel, is going to be the back end, a similar back end of the Gallery Climate Coalition when that comes online early autumn. So awesome. Have a play, you're welcome. But I'd really wait for the autumn one, because that I hope will be a game changer for us.
Yeah. Awesome. I can imagine that there are a few questions. I have one, which is quite, well, very basic and very predictable, I'm afraid. So you did, for instance, these exhibitions on saris or the Rebel show. is it more expensive to be sustainable?
It's a really good question. It's interesting because some people will say yes. I don't think it always is. Obviously, if we all start using lower carbon materials, the price will come down because the suppliers can buy them in larger quantities. However, I think it's not only about doing that. I think it's about just thinking differently, because we've been thinking in a certain way, very linear, doing things for a long time. And yes, if we try and just change like for like, it might be more expensive. But what I suggest is rethinking it completely, like exploding your mind and thinking, can we make walls, reusable walls that then stay on site? And I'm doing a research paper on that at the moment, and I will share it when it's ready, probably autumn, winter. Or can we just get rid of walls and do fabric? You know, so I don't think it's always more expensive. And I think, as you know, from the Design Museum, one of the greatest opportunities for designers is giving them these challenges and saying the budget is the budget, but as long as you give them the time, they can come up with really great things that are not always more expensive. And you know,
that's very good. Yeah. I thought you often see most creativity when there's limitations, so that I thought that's a very good example of that kind of process and how it works. And also the fact, well, the question of whether you really need that loan from abroad, it's often, you know, it's a question we're often dealing with, I think, as museums and in Holland as well. And it's a hard question because you want it, but do you really, really need it? It's a very, very important question. I think we could ask ourselves for each exhibition. So do you have any questions? I think if you put your hand up, like in a digital way, I should probably be able to see it. Oh, Gary, you're asking in a manual way. Yes.
Elise, that was a terrific presentation. Really, one of the best I've ever seen. Congratulations. You're so eloquent, and the material was so perfectly presented. That I was getting worried about the look that comes out of your exhibitions. It becomes a statement in itself. So it looked to me like it was interfering with the quality of pure presentation in the exhibition.
Yeah, it's a very good question. Now, for the Wastage exhibition, we were really comfortable with that and we leaned into it. For the Saris exhibition, where we had the cardboard walls, it really looked first class. I showed you the picture from the back to illustrate the fact that they were cardboard. When you're walking around the show, actually you couldn't tell at all. And for our Enzo Mari exhibition with the white walls, no one would know that they're not temporary MDF walls. There are some things I think we need to get more comfortable with. So for example, we're making plinths now and we're not sanding and filling the join as standard. So you can see the line so that they can be flat packed and toured. And I think if you're not used to seeing that, it might look a little strange. And that's something I'd say that as a sector, we need to get comfortable with things looking a little different. But I agree, sort of the crusty look isn't always appropriate. So it's really important that you get that quality. Otherwise, your colleagues won't come on board with you and we'll keep pushing back. And I know what you mean about that.
Yes, well, you say you're working with outside designers all the time, but so you must be indoctrinating them in a particularly intensive way.
Well, the lovely thing is, and we found this with designers and contractors too, they really want to do things differently. They're so grateful that someone is just giving them a list and helping them because, you know, they read the news, they have children, they understand that this is a thing. Whereas, you know, 10 years ago, you'd have to persuade them. Now, everybody's on board and that is so great. We're just like driving the bus and everyone's like, let me get on the bus.
Yeah, it's terrific. It's a wonderful initiative. Congratulations.
Do you any other questions? I don't see any hands, I don't think. I have one. I was wondering about all the analysis. Is that something you do, or do you have someone qualified on your team for that especially, or?
A great question. So we've really tried to we started off working with a consultancy, but we've really tried to keep it in-house because otherwise, and train the staff in-house. I have a strong belief that all jobs are climate jobs and everybody should be equipped to do it. Otherwise it becomes, you know, an add-on. You need to find the budgets get cut. So I lead the environmental impact package, if you like, the strategy, and somebody in my team is the environmental impact manager, and she helps all the project managers do their reporting. And on every project team, it's in people's forward job plans, it's in their job descriptions, they have to do the reporting, the same way they have to do their budget reconciliation. And the lovely thing is, no one minds at all. We make sure that when we plan their work, it's not like an extra and people are, there till 10 o'clock at night. We've got support to help them. They understand why they're doing it. They see change, they see reduction. And we haven't had any pushback at all. Although, it is a bit of extra work, of course, but that's also life. Everyone's going to have to do it. So we're training them now.
Wonderful. I think you were just so complete and extensive that there are no questions, which I can completely imagine. So I guess, I'm sure we'll have a lot of empty seats at project management tables in Dutch museums from now on,
we have one
which is a
question.
great thing. Oh, we have?
Yeah, one.
Great.
It's about the slide with the circle diagram, slide 49. Are they referring to different exhibits? What were we looking at?
Okay, good question. Let me just get back to 49. Oh, yes, that is all different exhibits from 2023. So every exhibition, there we go, I'll come on to it. Every exhibition and display we did in London in 2023, the project team did their carbon reporting, and this was the result.
Right.
Before we go, may I say one thing on the object selection? So
great.
We're talking about making sure, having that question, do you really need the objects? I think it's really important to say that I'm not advocating that we don't show artwork from artists from around the world, particularly, and I don't really like these terms, but from the global south. What the invitation to do is to just think differently about it. Like, do you have to ship that big piece? Could the artist come for residency? Are they here anyway? Could we do repros? I'm not saying that we should become insular and only show artwork and objects locally. That's not that's not the message. That's certainly not our intentions. Again, it's just about like exploding the box and trying to think of different routes to have perhaps an even more exciting result.
Yeah, that's a great message. Thank you so much, and thank all of you for attending. This really is what we try to achieve with ICOM Netherlands. We're trying to be more than a white card, even though the white card is wonderful, but to really bring people together and share experiences and knowledge internationally and learn from each other. So spread your enthusiasm and join us again next time, which is, Milou, when are we?
The 3rd of
another
September.
Of these talks?
3rd of September.
3rd of September.
Yes.
And then I think we're hearing Arthur Affleck III from New York, who's the chair of the American Board for Children's Museums. And he's joining us with some colleagues on children's museums and best experiences and best practices. So Elise, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think you, I don't know the expression in English, but you moved a stone in our Dutch museum river. So thank you for that. And have a great Saturday and a great weekend, all of you. Thanks
Thanks for having me. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.